stay in office next year. By swiftly finalizing key economic appointments, President-elect Trump has effectively declared a trade war on the global stage. Let's examine the potential impact of Trump's second-term trade policies on our industries and economy. We are joined today by one of the nation's foremost trade experts, Professor Hyo-young Lee from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Hello, Professor Lee.
Good morning.
Yes, actually, with President Trump returning to office, there are a lot of concerns about his universal tariff policy, up to 20%. Do you think this policy will actually happen?
Well, if we look at what the U.S. administration would be vying for when it comes to universal tariffs, I guess we can understand where he comes from. The foremost purpose of the tariff policy of the U.S. administration, I expect, would be to rebalance the trade deficit situation with its key trading partners. And the U.S. has been actually suffering from a trade deficit since 2015. And the three top countries that have had trade surplus with the U.S. is China, Mexico, and Vietnam, followed by countries like Germany, Ireland, Japan, and Korea is the eighth trade deficit country with the U.S. And so when we think about that situation, I think that universal tariffs, the purpose of universal tariffs is to reverse this trade deficit problem that the U.S. Has been suffering with its major trading countries. And another issue is that the imposition of tariffs has its pros and cons for the U.S. economy.
Yeah, of course.
It will certainly have an effect on reducing the imports to the U.S. market, but it also contribute to increasing the consumer prices in the U.S. market because of increased import costs, and that will lead to inflation in the U.S. market. So I believe that the President-elect Trump is certainly aware of the economic logic behind imposing the tariffs, but the problem is that he doesn't really seem to care. Because as we have seen in the last two U.S. administrations, there seems to be less emphasis on the importance of cost effectiveness or cost reduction and effectiveness in the market, but more emphasis on the resilience in U.S. supply chains and strengthen economic security. And so I believe that in the first years, President-elect Trump may try to impose threats by threatening imposition of tariffs. But if he does not get what he wants in the end, I believe that the tariffs may be imposed in reality.
Okay, then perhaps we need to go back to what happened during his first term. Back in 2018, President Trump actually threatened to impose high tariffs on Korean products like washing machines, right? So there are concerns about potential targets this time again. So what kind of products within the Korea-U.S. trade system does Trump see the most problematic?
If we look at the trade basket between the U.S. and Korea, the top 5 export products that Korea exports to the U.S. are automobiles, automobile parts, petroleum products, semiconductors, and batteries. And most in particular, the automobiles exports has been enjoying a trade surplus with the U.S. during the past 20 years. And more recently, batteries exports to the U.S. market has increased significantly during the last 4 years or so. And so I guess this would be an area that would be of particular interest in the U.S. for imposing tariffs on Korea if it decides to deal with the trade deficit problem. However, there are also if you look at the market, if you look at the strategy that the U.S. is pursuing, there is much emphasis on making in America. In other words, it wants to become a global manufacturing country in the chip sector and also for the automobiles industry. And so it would try to stop exports of import products that would compete with its domestic automobile manufacturers, and it's trying to build up a advanced manufacturing facility for chips manufacturing. And so I believe that if the Trump administration wants to impose tariffs against Korea, and the most easily targeted areas would be the automobiles industry and the semiconductors exports that Korea is trying to export to the U.S.
Okay. Currently, South Korea is FTA member. So currently, the FTA states can enjoy some benefits like reduced tariffs. So many wonder if the universal tariff can have an impact on FTA. So will there be any difference between countries with FTAs and those without?
To cut this story short, I don't think that there will be much difference in Trump's tariff policy with regard to countries that have FTA with the U.S. and those countries that don't have an FTA with the U.S. Because in addition to the universal tariffs, the President-elect Trump also promised to impose reciprocal tariffs based on the legislation of a law called Trump Reciprocal Trade Act. And that act aims to address the unfair trade relations that Trump has, that the U.S. government has with its trading partners, especially those countries that enjoy trade surplus with the U.S. by imposing higher tariffs or taxes on U.S. products and services. When we come back to Korea, Korea has an FTA with the U.S., the Korea-U.S. Chorus FTA. And under the FTA, we have arranged terms to impose zero tariffs on automobiles. So we don't have any reciprocal, we won't actually be subject to the reciprocal tariffs that could be devised by the Trump administration, at least for autos, because we already have zero tariffs on U.S. automobiles. However, there are other legal instruments that I think Trump administration can use. If you look back at the first Trump administration, it targeted imported steel and aluminum by imposing 25% tariffs based on Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. And that was for national security reasons. And so considering that other legal instruments could be used for imposing increased tariffs, regardless of FTA, I think that it is possible that even FTA countries, even countries that have FTA with the U.S. could be subject to increased tariffs if the Trump administration decides that it is beneficial to the U.S. economy.
So now that Pierre Navarro, who actually was behind of renegotiating FTA with Korea in the past. Now he is trade advisor for the President Trump. So do you think how significant that will be?
Judging from the role that Navarro played during the first Trump administration, I think that there will be very high emphasis on trade protectionism. I'm not sure what other legal instruments the U.S. Government would devise, but I'm certainly sure that the tariff measures will be very aggressive. And there may be other instruments that that the U.S. may use in order to induce countries to increase their imports of U.S. products. For example, they could also take issue with the exchange rate problem, which contributes to increased imports into the U.S. due to the price competitiveness caused by the strong dollar. And so there may be other instruments that could be devised by the new advisor, but it all remains to be seen what will actually happen when he comes into office, when President Trump comes into office.
All right. Then, but there are also some arguments that President Trump, in the past, he used the tariff policy to address other issues like drug trafficking or immigration, not just the trade deficit issue, right? So I'm just wondering if President Trump uses the same approach, using the tariff policy as a negotiation tool to fix other problems.
Even before coming to office, President-elect Trump has he has promised that he will impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico for dealing with the illegal immigrant issue and drug trafficking issue that the U.S. is facing. And so I think it is quite possible that the next Trump administration will be using these tariff policies to resolve issues that are not traditionally trade related. So such social issues like immigration and drug issues could also be addressed under the Trump administration. But even under the Biden administration, there have been attempts to use the tariff policy or the trade policy to address issues like human rights. Under Biden, there was this legislation called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which actually authorized the imposition of import bans on products coming in from China, Xinjiang region, that were presumably using forced labor. And so this means that even under the Biden administration, trade policy tools were used to address human rights issues, which are traditionally non-trade issues. So I think that it is highly possible that under Trump, trade policy tools could be very useful for his administration to try to address issues that are not directly trade related. But again, although in appearance they may not seem directly related to trade and economic issues, they're actually related because the forced labor issue is actually linked to cheaper labor costs.
Of course.
And so, and that means price competitiveness in the U.S. market. And so, although it is a human rights issue, it's also an economic issue as well. And as for illegal immigrant and drug trafficking issue, this is also related to the competitiveness of the U.S. manufacturing industry and the employment of American workers.
In the long term.
Yes, in the long term. And so this issue is also indirectly linked to the U.S. economy. And so I think he will definitely use tariffs as a tool to address these issues, which are in the underground, really economic issues as well.
Yeah, actually key issues for the South Korean company might be IRA and CHIPS Act, because many South Korean companies have invested huge amount of money under these policies.
Yes.
So actually, President-elect Trump already warned that he's going to cut subsidies under these policies. So how should Korean companies respond to these changes?
Actually, I think we should divide the CHIPS Act subsidies and the IRA subsidies. President-elect Trump actually didn't pledge to eliminate or repeal the CHIPS Act subsidies, although he did express his criticism against the subsidization program because if the foreign companies are receiving the subsidies. He especially showed his dissatisfaction with the CHIPS Act subsidies going to companies like TSMC and for those companies in the U.S. And so there was his dissatisfaction came from his sort of misunderstanding of the CHIPS Act subsidies. However, there are also experts saying that the CHIPS Act subsidies are actually could remain intact because it actually provides benefits to Republican-dominated states as well. And one of the largest beneficiaries of the CHIPS Act subsidies is the U.S. domestic firm Intel. And so it is highly more likely that the CHIPS Act subsidies may remain intact rather than being repealed as a whole. There may be modifications of the implementation guidelines for providing the CHIPS Act. And so for companies like Samsung, which are intend to receive the CHIPS Act subsidies, I think that they should prepare for some modifications of the implementation guidelines for receiving the CHIPS Act subsidies, and try to adjust to that change situation in the future. As for IRA, I think it's a little bit different. I think it is more likely that the IRA could be repealed. Because the incoming Trump administration has a very different policy with regard to energy.
Yes.
And so it is not, it has a great dislike for the Biden administration clean energy policy.
Of course.
And he has pledged to repeal, to end the Biden's EV, electric vehicle mandate, once on his first day in office. And so I think it is highly possible that he may try to repeal the IRA. But again, there are benefits of IRA that are also beneficial to the US states as well. And the overall clean energy policy, some of the clean energy policies under the IRA are maybe more difficult to repeal as compared to the purchase, the tax credits that are given to the consumer, U.S. consumers for purchasing EVs. And so I think it could be partially that some elements of IRA could be repealed, especially the tax credits for purchasing EVs could be an easier target. So for Korean companies like Hyundai Motors, which are looking forward to the IRA subsidies, they may have a more difficult challenge for receiving the IRA subsidies and investing in the U.S. market, because they have already pledged to invest huge amounts of money to invest to build EV manufacturing facilities in the US. And another problem is because of the change in policy, the demand for EVs may dwindle because of this dislike for EV and the lack of tax credits for purchasing EVs. But I heard that Hyundai Motors is still going to go on with their plan. And
well, on that EV policy, South Korean automakers are struggling with the issue of competing with cheaper Chinese EVs.
Yes.
So do you think this policy change can have a huge impact on Korea's EV industry?
The changed situation in the U.S. EV market, as I explained, is going to certainly be a difficult obstacle for Korean exporters of EVs to the U.S. market because of the drop in demand for EV due to the absence of tax credits. If Trump decides to repeal the tax credits for EVs. However, there's another issue in the U.S. market. There is more stiff competition in the EV market, especially as Japanese hybrid cars are gaining more market share in the U.S. market. The competitiveness of EV cars are actually becoming an issue, and there is more demand for hybrid cars rather than EV cars. And so it's going to be another issue for Korean EV manufacturers that are trying to sell to the US market. However, the overall trend the global trend for clean energy, I believe, is a global trend that cannot be reversible, because the issue of climate change is still a very important issue for all the countries. And there's another large and important market for Korea, which is the EU. And the EU still continues to advance on its green industrial strategy. And so, although in the short term, the demand for EV exports could drop, and it could be a difficult situation for our EV manufacturers, in the long term, the demand for more low carbon products will continue to increase. And so, although we need to look beyond the next 4 years under the Trump administration and look for a more viable solution to deal with the green transition issue from a longer perspective.
Yeah. Now then you tell us there are lots of challenges ahead of us, but I also believe that there are areas of opportunities as well. Because a Trump administration will focus more on defense modernization. That means we have some opportunities to cooperate in defense industry, right? So he recently showed interest in shipbuilding industry with South Korea. So what kind of Korean industry that can benefit under his presidency?
As you correctly mentioned, the shipbuilding industry was an area identified by President-elect Trump during his summit call at the summit level with our Korean government. And so I believe that is an area where we can cooperate with the U.S. Under the incoming administration, especially because the shipbuilding industry is important from both the commercial and national security perspective. In terms of commercial, the U.S. government, the next incoming U.S. government has placed a high emphasis on the importance of high efficiency and low cost energy. And though that means that there will be focus on the production of gas and oil industry, and especially the LNG and LPG gas industries will face high demand. And it also implies that there will be increased demand for LNG and LPG carriers, for which Korea is strong in manufacturing. And so I believe that there will be an increased demand in both the gas and oil industry and the carriers and facilities and infrastructure that support the gas and oil industry as well. Another area that could be an opportunity for Korea to cooperate more with the U.S. is the nuclear energy industry, because it's another source of energy that produces high efficiency, low cost. And so, and especially among the nuclear energy plants, the SMR, the small module reactor industry, where Korea is experienced in, I believe could also be an area where the U.S. and Korea could cooperate in the future.
Yeah, of course. And you also mentioned the chips. It would be very vital for manufacturing high-tech weapon system as well. So there can be a lot of demand.
Yes. And also, since the U.S. is very much interested in advancing its AI industry, it wants to be the global top leader in AI.
Yes.
And what is important for AI are data centers, which consume a lot of electricity and a lot of energy. And the Trump administration, I think, it considers nuclear energy plants as an important source of energy, which produces low-cost energy. And so I think the nuclear energy industry has a high potential for cooperation between the two countries.
Yes, like you said, it'll be very interesting to see whether South Korea can turn these challenges into opportunities in the coming years for our national interest.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.